Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the America's Jobs Team. I'm Carla Sones and I am here very excited to interview Bill Cronin, who is the president and CEO down in Florida at the Pasco Economic Development Council. So Bill, welcome to the podcast.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me, Carla.
Yeah, before we were actually recording, we found out some amazing information. And that is that we both grew up in the same hometown. Almost said no one ever because it's such a small town. So I love meeting people that now live in different states. Didn't even know our paths crossed like that, but we got to talk about all kinds of things, Standish, Michigan, which is pretty exciting. But I'm curious to know how a kid that grew up in Standish, Michigan, ended up in economic development, now working as the president and CEO of a significant operation down in Pasco, Florida. So give us the little backstory there.
Sure. And it's funny because most of us in economic development never did this on purpose. We almost all accidentally fall into these careers. And growing up in Standish and even in college at Michigan State, didn't even know that economic development was a career option. And so I had started out in college focused on international business and Chinese. And this was just prior to the Tiananmen Square incident where the doors to China had shut and there wasn't a lot of opportunities for people to do business in China. So my wife and I moved to Florida where we had spent spring break on many occasions over the years. And we said, let's try this out for a couple years. We ended up staying in Jacksonville for almost 20. We liked it so much. And for the first half of that, I was in international shipping and was focused on steamship business. So import, export, containers, mostly South America, Australia, New Zealand. Didn't really get to use my Chinese very much. I probably should have learned Spanish. But fast forward a few years into that, I was in sales and I was traveling throughout the South Atlantic and spending a lot of time on the road. And my wife was pregnant with our first child and really wanted to spend some more time at home. So I called the local Chamber of Commerce and said, do you have any jobs available that are internationally focused? And they said, no, we don't, but we know of this really cool opportunity coming available with a controversial organization at that time called Enterprise Florida. And Enterprise Florida was the very first state to go to a public-private partnership. Now there's probably about 37 of them out there at the state level. And it was kind of an experiment in economic development where we were a 501c3, we were a government agency, but we were not truly government. And so you learned a lot in an experimental situation. I started out in international, worked there for about 10 years. And of that 10, 8 of those years were with Jeb Bush, who was our governor. And Jeb was a rock star. He was our Secretary of Commerce previously. So he hit the ground running and traveled the world with him for 10 years and then went to work for Mark Sanford up in South Carolina as the Director of Commerce there, which is a real competitive area. A lot of focus on automobile industry, Boeing, Google, a lot of wonderful projects there. From there, went on to Atlanta as economic development for the city of Atlanta, and Invest Atlanta was part of the branding effort there. And then city of Charlotte as the economic development director for the city of Charlotte. And then a headhunter approached me and said, hey, I know you haven't moved your kids and your family to Charlotte yet. And I know they're both on the Florida prepaid college plan. And I said, well, that's pretty wise of you to know that. And he says, well, we've got this place called Pasco County. I want to tell you about it. I knew Pasco from my old shipping days. And he says, but I want to tell you about this 1-cent sales tax that they have, that 20% goes to economic development, kind of like the Texas model of 4A and 4B tax. And I said, well, that's really competitive. And that got my attention. And here we are. I've been here for 4 years now.
Awesome. Well, I love to hear the stories, and you've certainly spent time learning economic development from multiple different places. Some of my favorite cities you've been at the helm. So it's just a very interesting background. I want to flash forward to 2020, which for many people has just been, kind of the doozy of a year. So I'm curious for you. I know nobody kind of has made it out of 2020 without some hiccups along the way and some challenges. But for you and your leadership, what do you feel like has been one of your biggest challenges as you lead an economic development corporation down in Florida? And what are you doing to kind of navigate through that challenge?
Yeah, so I think we're in a unique position that we're able to see a lot of what's going on in the community when the community may be busy just trying to manage their own daily schedules and just trying to keep their head above water. And we've had a really strong staff here with a lot of different departments, so we were able to keep those programs going, but we also could see and sense the pulse of the community to know when they needed relief, when they needed to retool, when they needed to refocus. And we had some programs in place through our incubators. We actually own 3 incubators. We're probably one of the only economic development organizations you'll meet that actually owns and operates its own incubators. But having that entrepreneurial focus allowed us to quickly use those tools to do things like roll out emergency grants using our microloan program. I think the most challenging thing for any of us in this role is remaining relevant in being able to find what the pulse of the community is so that you can find out where those pain points are and not just show up with some pre-scripted solution, because this was a new one. This was something none of us had ever experienced before. Here in Florida, we deal with some hurricanes and things like that. So we know about resiliency, we know how to respond. And usually we rely on our neighbors and our counties around us to all come together and help. But nobody could really do that this time because everybody was hurting all across the state. And I think that the second most biggest challenge was staying energized through it too, because even when we had the ability to make a difference and help, there's a lot of long hours. I mean, we were thankful that we were working 12, 14-hour days where some people weren't working at all. But even then, it takes a while to stay energized. So we would have regular Zoom meetings every single day. We still do, because we have some staff that work from home. We have some staff that work in the office. It's a way we can stay connected. But we'll do things like have funny hat day and stuff like that, just to keep it energized. And now it's that much more intimate too, because we're seeing into people's homes. We hear the dogs barking, the babies crying, bad hair days, baseball hat days, those types of things. So all of that is, as hard as it is, lended to a lot of our successes over the last 6 months.
Yeah. Were the daily meetings something that you did pre-COVID before, like when you were in the office, or is that something you really started like as a result of the pandemic and the work shifting so quickly?
That was a result of the pandemic. So we used to have weekly meetings on Mondays. We'd get together, talk about what last week was like and what our plans were next week, any big items that we had to deal with in the next 30 days. This was a day-to-day issue where, depending on what type of mandates or ordinances were being put out, depending on grants and availability of grants, depending on everything from how much money we could put out in the community through ACH, because there's even requirements on that. And then also our staff, making sure that our staff was healthy and checking in regularly and seeing what they needed. And you remember, and this was a nightmare for a lot of people, but toilet paper shortages and things like that early on in that pandemic that no one was really prepared for. So we would buy supplies and drop them off to staff and things like that. So it was something that brought us together. It was kind of like a big team building event that you might pay a consultant to do. Instead, we're all still doing it.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like we are all still doing it. And I'm curious for you, has there been anything that you started doing during the pandemic that you don't see ever really going back? Maybe that is like having those kind of daily short staff meetings, or is there anything else that you organizationally or with your team, or how you engage with your team, that you are like, this actually is maybe a good result of the pandemic, if that's fair to say? Yeah,
I got goosebumps. There's two things. One of course is that communication style. Now we're always open, and we were pretty much 24/7 anyways, but it's gone to a different level. We use Teams to communicate. We also, of course, have Zoom and WebEx and a variety of different ways to connect because we've got multiple locations. But probably the more important and more interesting thing to your listeners and viewers is going to be this idea of rising to the challenge and being able to meet what the needs are on a daily basis, and being able to say, it's okay not to do what we plan to do today, that we can change and pivot and try new things. So we've over this last 6 months really become known as a group that's not afraid to try something new. And it started off with some of our technology. I mean, we invested very quickly in technology. As soon as we saw this coming, we got webcams for everyone. We invested in things like Owls and Polys and things like that to do those video conferences and hybrid events. But making sure that we had everyone ready to go on the fly anytime, so that if an elected official said, I need to use WebEx instead of Zoom, we could quickly pivot, and any of our staff could do that. And now we do things like site visits virtually. So we've got site location consultants that we're showing videos of a site that we've used drones to film, and doing presentations like that. So everyone's become this expert at delivering things virtually, whereas some of us weren't even public facing before. And now everyone in the organization has kind of rose to that challenge, but then also they're not afraid to try new things. And it's not a question, it's not inhibited by fear anymore of the unknown.
Yeah, I think that is one of the great things that I've seen come out of the pandemic, is just this feeling of, we don't really have a choice of,
Right.
it's kind of like that. We're at the edge of the cliff and we have to decide what to do. And there's something coming, and there's really no other option than to take a leap of faith.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I feel like a lot of people, it's given them permission
that's right.
to ask different questions, to kind of challenge the status quo, and to, as you said, kind of just get a little bit more innovative. And they may have wanted to in the past, but staying in their lane and kind of keeping their head down kind of kept them from maybe voicing that. And there's something about being in crisis that cause people to say like, hey, like I have an idea and maybe we could try this. And it's really been cool, not just economic development stories like your teams, but when you hear about companies pivoting and just individuals pivoting, and some of the great innovation that's come, it's pretty neat when you look at it from that angle. So let's talk a little bit about your leadership. You've been in quite a few different places, very different states and the way that they operate in terms of economic development, but played a significant role in many of the places that you were at. And I'm curious for you, if you had to describe kind of your leadership qualities, what are kind of your strengths, and how do you feel like that plays into how you lead now in Pasco? So if you were to kind of talk to your team, like what would they say in terms of your strengths and how that shows up in your leadership?
Yeah, well, I think part of it comes from being older in the role and more mature. I think economic development is an experiential job. You can't just study economic development. You actually have to do it to be able to get the knowledge and the experience. And I think having been around a while and then exposed to different situations has really been helpful, especially with some of the places I've worked. So, starting in Florida, pretty dynamic in an organization that wasn't afraid to try new things because it was a new thing. But then going to a very traditional government organization with South Carolina Department of Commerce, where we were a cabinet level agency of the governor and worked very closely together with the governor. Then on to Atlanta, that had a very redevelopment focus and a lot more emphasis on social and economic mobility. In Charlotte, very similar to that as well, too. So you pick up bits and pieces through that time. And it's only after you've spent some time in each of those that you can actually put them together into a puzzle. And I don't think, had I been in this role 20 years ago, I don't think I could have handled it the same way now without having that experience in each one of those areas, whether it be entrepreneurship, redevelopment, workforce development, international trade, recruitment, those types of things. And to know each of those parts, you're able to step back, kind of like a short order cook in a restaurant, and step back and say, okay, how do I bring this all together that it makes the people in the dining room happy and it still tastes good too? So doing it and then making sure that that your constituents or your stakeholders are happy with the results that you're getting, and that you're very conscientious about that. Because I've worked in a lot of places where my predecessors would go in and say, hey, this is what IEDC prescribes, or this is what our local association prescribes, without really listening to what their stakeholders were telling them. And if you don't do that, then you're quickly going to be out of a job, because your stakeholders ultimately are the ones that are going to keep you juiced up and give you the fuel that you need to be able to do the job. So hiring good is another one. Is you're around long enough, you can spot the right types of team members that you need on the bus, and then move them around if you need to get them in the right seat too. So I think really just that experiential knowledge of having done this for a while. I've had a couple of my staff members call me the Forrest Gump of economic development, because I've got these wonderful stories, and it's a lot of right place, right time. You know, I didn't know I was going to work for Jeb Bush. I didn't know I was going to work for Mark Sanford. Didn't know I was going to work for Nikki Haley or Kasim Reed. And to be exposed to some of their leadership styles and the challenges that they might have been going through at the time they were leaders too, gives you that front row seat, kind of like Forrest Gump, where you're sitting on the sideline and you got to see something that is going to be in history books later.
Yeah, so that gives us a perfect segue, because I was going to ask you a little bit about your mentors. I personally feel like mentors, especially in this business, because it just feels like we need those stories, like those of us that are still learning the business, and you still are kind of soaking in some of the experiences. We need to hear the stories of how deals were done and how things have happened, and just to be able to soak in all the different ways that even a deal can be packaged.
Yeah.
So I'm for you, who were some of your biggest mentors as you continue to grow in your career? And what role has that kind of mentorship really played in your ability to kind of rise and continue to grow in economic development and grow your career in economic development?
Yeah. Oh, some of them are going to be embarrassed because they're still in the profession. So, but I'll mention their name just because I love them to death. But Mike Fitzgerald was one early on. Mike is in Southern Denver area. He was with us at Enterprise Florida. Real dynamic individual. He would look at things in a much different light, and not traditional. Came from the Northwest, quite a bit away from Florida. Jerry Malott was in Jacksonville, Florida. Jerry gave me office space when I was with Enterprise Florida. He was at the chamber, but he was at the time the chair of the Florida Economic Development Council, and they were doing some really wonderful things on a regional basis there. And he's still a very dear friend as well. Jeb Bush, without a doubt. Jeb is an amazing individual, strong character. Just someone that's very easy to get behind, other than the fact he's very, very tall and walks very fast. And I think he only sleeps maybe 4 hours a day. But he gets it. He understands why we need to do what we do. And I remember him saying once, if not us, then who? And still to this day, I find myself saying that with our staff, is that there are times when we can see a gap in the system, and sometimes we have to stand in that gap and create a new program. And that's one that I take with me wherever I go. I think I'm 55 now, and I think at this age in my life, I look at different seasons and different needs. And There's some even through church and marriage. You have different mentors and different counselors for different things and in different seasons in your life. But I think even now, I find myself looking at younger people and understanding that they may not have been traditionally trained the same way I was. They're looking at things with a fresh new set of eyes, and I can learn from them. And I don't know that 10 or 20 years ago, I would have been ready for that. So I think that list is going to expand, and there's going to be younger people in that conversation, or others that even have opposing views in that conversation, because you can always learn a lot from people. Richard Florida, I think you guys have heard of Richard. Richard's wife and my wife went to high school together in Troy, and we often have this debate about the creative class having to be in this urban area with old buildings and new ideas, and we're kind of turning that on its head right now, Richard, if you're listening, because you look at suburbia and everyone now wants to get away from density. They like having bike trails and those type of amenities. And we're seeing a lot of those tech companies and things moving out to the suburbs to enjoy what we have here in Pasco. So yeah, I don't mean to name drop, but boy, some of these guys are legends or will be legends.
Yeah, for sure. And several of them that you mentioned, when you mentioned Jerry, I also am a huge Jerry fan. He's just amazing. So curious from you, I know along the lines as you have grown in your career, that you've probably had some tough moments. I think most economic developers, have days, weeks, months, maybe even years sometimes where it's just rough. Can you tell us a little bit about a tough lesson that you learned? It can be recent, it can be from way back when, but just kind of a tough lesson that you think somebody else might be able to learn from.
Yeah, so maybe people have heard this. It used to be an old adage that people said a lot, and it didn't hit home until it happened to me. But fire quickly, hire slow. You've heard that term before. And there was a time when I did not practice that, and I left somebody employed for too long for us and for that individual, where it wasn't productive for anybody. And I learned that, especially when it's something damaging to your organization, that you do have to act quick, you do have to think quick to prevent any further damage. And when it's something that is usually beneficial to an organization, lots of times you got to think about it really hard too, because there might be something that you're not seeing, like it may not be the silver lining. It may not be as good as it looks. So you have to take some time, especially if you're enamored with whatever shiny object is being dangled in front of you, that may not be the magic key that your organization needs. And in that sense, you take more time. So I think that's probably the most important lesson that's still even today, that I still dwell on and make sure, one, I don't make that mistake again, because it was very painful. And two, that I have the wisdom to make those good decisions when it comes to bettering our organization.
Yeah, I like that example a lot, because, a lot of times when we ask that question of economic developers, they, have a deal, like it's about a deal that kind of went sideways, which there's nothing wrong with that. Those are great, tough lessons we've all had too. But I really like that practical advice about, how you're kind of managing the individuals around you and the energy of a team. Because as you mentioned, having one person on the team that is not the right fit or is draining energy really can kind of poison the whole well. And if you allow that to fester, it causes a lot of damage that takes a really long time to get back on the right tracks. And so I like that kind of old adage, fire quick, hire slow.
It's funny how we all focus on deals, though. And it's our stakeholders' fault. It's our own fault. We all talk about the deal. But without the team, you can't do the deal. And there's still that management piece where if you take care of your own house, then you can help that deal better. I mean, if I'm not taking care of business in my own house, then I really have no business going out and telling this prospective investor that's coming into my region how great things are when I can't talk at the same level as far as being a CEO.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. And I think it's, in my experience of working with economic developers, I don't know if they don't feel like anybody's ever given them the permission to really talk about how they're running their business. It's always been about others.
Mhm.
Or if they are just a lot of times like deal junkies. And like that's what has always, like that's where they get so much adrenaline from. That it's
Yeah.
not that they don't care about their team. It's just that when you ask them about what excites them and what the hard lessons are, they always go back to the deal, maybe because that's just they're deal junkies at heart.
Well, I think a lot of our funding is based on people's perception on how we're
Mhm.
winning. And that's the measuring stick they use. But I think it also hurts us too, because we don't talk about the deals we lose enough either, and what goes into that, and all of the work. I mean, most of us, even if you're having a really good year, you win a third of the deals
Mhm.
that come through, and the other 2/3 you're losing. And there's no doubt about it. Somebody else is either winning them or they're falling apart and they're just not happening anywhere. But none of us ever talk about the bad deals or the ones we lost. And we've been trained to just, it's all sunshine, it's all wonderful stuff. And it's not always that. And I think it behooves us to talk about that, to help manage expectations of our stakeholders, that, when they come into your boardroom and say, why didn't we win Amazon HQ2? And you feel like laughing a little bit, but at the same time, it's because we focus so much on winning that deal, and that everybody has a chance of winning the big buffalo or elephant that's out there.
Yeah, I can't say enough about that because we've seen so many economic developers have really painful moments because they've even just had a change in their elected officials. Like things were rolling, and then one cycle change, and then they can
Mhm.
really be in a vulnerable place and be a
Yeah.
very solid economic developer. And it's it's so important in this profession to kind of manage those expectations, especially from people who have a lot of decision-making power.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
that's not something that gives a lot of economic developers a ton of energy,
No,
but it's going to suck the energy dry if you don't do it.
it's very real. It is very real,
Very,
and it can
very real.
happen very quickly. And I think people forget that, especially for like those of us that are funded by general funds. General funds are pretty vulnerable in most locations, because the elected officials can just change tomorrow and say, we're going to use it towards this, and your plans are done, and um, you are reliant on other people's perception of you in that story, and your sphere of influence may not be as big as you really think it is. So you've got to remember where you're at in the big scheme of things.
Yeah, well, I can kind of tell your passion for economic development and just even those that are in this career pathway. I'm curious for you, we were in 2020. It's been, a weird year to say the
Yeah.
least. And I know you probably are still seeing deal flow and things are kind of moving along there. But as you kind of think through, like the next year or so of economic development and you think about it as a profession,
Hmm.
what excites you about where the profession is heading or where you hope maybe it's heading as we continue to kind of, you know, navigate a post-COVID world? I don't even know if we
Right.
can say that yet, might be premature, but as we kind of come out of the pandemic.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good question. It is exciting because I think COVID has taught us that we can do things differently, first of all, in businesses especially. We're seeing, I mean, we're remote, and we're using Zoom, and we're using tools to be able to conduct business now. We're seeing big changes in that. And I think the biggest issue, and we've been toying with this idea um, about workforce, and workforce being more important, and it is really, than the deal. Get the deal junkies out of the way, and we focus on workforce and the talent pipeline. And I think also social and economic mobility. You hear discussion about that a lot, making sure we've got the right career paths for every individual. I think we're coming into an age, though, where within the next year, we'll start to have discussions around the tech versus touch field, meaning there are people that have to show up to work, like manufacturing, where that old 20-minute drive time is still very important, that you are close to your workforce and you're within 20 minutes. But those that don't have to do that, that can use Zoom and can be in Alaska or Kalamazoo and report to a factory or a building in Pasco. There's not as much that cements that workforce into that local area like manufacturing did. And now, how do we measure that? How do we measure that company's growth if their employees are all over the place? And how do we take responsibility for that workforce training and making sure that they get the right training? And does that money go to our local community as they grow? How does that fit together? And then take it a step further and you look at the workforce education piece of it. And now if you're K through 12, and you're going to go into manufacturing, well, you probably need to go to the school that's in your local area. But if you're not, there's no sense that, why should I have to go to a Pasco school? I could go to Harvard if it's going to be online, and I'm going to be an online job in the future and have that tech job versus touch. So now your workforce training has changed. And the thing that really is going to cement those families into your area is going to be things like quality of life, which used to just be focused on things like entrepreneurialism and headquarters. Now it's become very important because people want to be able to work from home. They want their families to be able to access school. And if it's going to be virtual, they can go all over the world for it in virtual. So you've got to have something that keeps them here. If you want them, that is. You might not want them, you might be able to get rid of some people and because they can live anywhere now. But I think that is the trends that we're going to have to be focused with. And it may lead to that workforce in the future, deciding early on, much earlier in their life of what they're going to do for a living. If you're growing up in Standish, Michigan, and they say, do you want to be tech or do you want to be touch? You're probably going to have to make that decision in your high school years to make sure that you get the right schooling, kind of like the Germans or the Swiss. So that would be a huge change for America. We have not ever seen that decision made that far in advance. And I think it will make us smarter in the long run.
Awesome. Well, it is exciting. I think the future of economic development is exciting. And I've really enjoyed having a conversation with you today. Thank you so much for being on our podcast. And from one Standish Sterling Central grad to another, I wish nothing but the best for you. I look forward to staying in touch and hearing about all things Pasco, Florida.
Thanks, Carla. Go Panthers.
Yes.